Hello, welcome to another edition of Political Theory Fun Time with me, Professor Selby. Today, we're going to discuss the basic outline of the main pieces of John Locke's argument, especially this idea called the state of nature. This is this critically important Lockean idea. We need to really figure out, get a handle on how it works, okay? So that's what we're going to do today. And here we go. All right, just some super quick revisiting stuff from other Lockean from pages I put up other places and stuff like that. Locke is one of the top five philosophers of all time. He's incredibly important. He lived during the early Enlightenment. He was an interdisciplinary scholar with influence in philosophy, science, medicine, education, and more. One of his key ideas was this idea of the tabula rasa. Individuals are a blank slate, i.e., there's no original sin. Also, religious toleration, especially the modern notion of it, is almost directly his provenance. Like, he really was super important in it. And empiricism and scientific discovery, meaning we build our theories out of our observations, not we theory build and then go see if the observations match. I'm not as much of an empiricist as he is. I do believe empiricism is incredibly important in science. I'm happy for his contributions there. I think they're both good ways of doing science. So that's just all I would say about that. And here we go. So this is in one of my Canvas pages as well, but it's important to remember the historical and political context of the second treatise of government, which was the Glorious Revolution in England. Okay, when I teach this class live, I say, "Hey kids, do you think was the Glorious Revolution good or bad?" And they all kind of look at me and I go, "It was good. It was glorious, right? That's why it's called the Glorious Revolution, because it was such a good one." And it was glorious because it was almost bloodless. I mean, there was a couple of the King's Guard that were killed, but basically what happened in 1688, England was mad at their Catholic king who was trying to be a sort of absolute monarch. And so they kicked him out and they brought in someone who would govern with parliament. And from 1688 to today, England has had constitutional governance, right? So that's why it's the Glorious Revolution. It's quite obvious that a set of ideas designed to justify one revolution can be reapplied to another one, right? So that's both the American Revolution, where Locke was big in America. He was a major influence on the ideology, the revolutionary ideology. But the French Revolution also, different kinds of colorations, but influenced. Okay, so Locke's main idea that we need to really wrap our brains around is called the state of nature. Philosophically speaking, this idea predates Locke, but his version is so important, and so many contemporary people kind of riff on it as well, that there's reason why we're talking about his version. Thomas Hobbes is another English guy, not as important in the United States of America, but has a much different notion of the state of nature. Okay, but other people like Pufendorf, Grotius, some important political philosophers from like the 1500s, which is a little bit before Locke's time, were all using this idea. And the basic idea, the logic of what Locke is doing here is it's basically like, look, humans once lived in this sort of natural state where there wasn't a government, okay? And this natural state had certain characteristics to it, including basic respect for individual liberties. Okay, state of nature has a law of nature that governs it. Okay, and so basically what John Locke then argues is that this set of rights that existed naturally can never be justly taken away from you, and that if your government is taking them away, you have the right to revolution. Okay, no one can take away your natural rights. You're not even allowed to give them up voluntarily. I no longer want to have freedom of speech. And Locke says that's an irrational thing. You can say that, but no, we're not going to let you do that. Okay? And sometimes Lockean liberalism is called natural rights liberalism for exactly this reason. There's a set of natural rights. Governments need to respect them just as much as other individuals need to respect them. There you go. Sorry for the light behind me. This is the best I can do today. Um, so what are rights founded on, even in the state of nature? So you have these rights, but okay, well, even in the state of nature, where did they come from? They come from your human reason, okay? The fact that individuals have reason lifts them out of the animalistic world and gives them a much more voluntaristic way of being able to deal with one another. And you can use reason to direct and guide your actions. You're not acting just based on instinct. You can think further into the future and think through consequences and all of that kind of stuff. Reason also allows you to be moral and to treat others in ethical ways. Okay. A later liberal says, respect due to a being endowed with reason. Okay. And this later liberal is a guy, Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, because you can't read him, because he's actually very tough to read. See, that's a Kant joke. It's about as good as they get in political theory. Okay. But I want you to write down that critical phrase. Okay. Respect due to a being endowed with reason. All forms of liberalism basically begin there. Locke doesn't quite say it in those words, but that's a great summation of what Locke's doing, and Kant saw himself trying to sort of like fix and update Locke. So perfect. Thank you, Kant. And that's really the foundation. We could call that the primary assumption of what's really motivating liberalism. Reason. Respect due to being endowed with reason. So what did the state of nature look like? And John Locke really thinks this is a historical place. Okay, and he even talks, he's like, well, look at the Bible. The Jews were walking around in the desert and they didn't have a government yet, right? So what does it look like? Okay, so there's no government first, right? It's a state. It's a way of living before governments have been established. There's no written down laws. There's no police. There's no judges. Okay. Sometimes state of nature appears in international relations literature to refer to like governments interacting with each other, because there's no police. There's no, like, the UN is not actually a police force. They have no ability to force people to do anything. Like, even when they send peacekeepers, all the peacekeepers do is try to get in between the two sides. It makes it harder for them to fight, but then they just go find somewhere else to go kill each other. Okay. The UN does not have the authority to stop people from fighting. But the government sure does. If you're shooting at your neighbor and he's shooting at you, the police are going to show up and they're going to say, cut it out. You're both under arrest. What the heck? We live in a society, people. And government, we call that third party enforcement. Okay. So characteristic 1 of state of nature, no government or third party enforcement. Okay. Characteristic 2, everyone is perfectly free, but only within the bounds of the laws of nature. Okay, the state of nature has laws which govern it. That's what he's very clear about that. Though it is a state of liberty, it is not a state of license. So you are free to do what you choose within the boundary of the laws of nature, which turn out to be relatively stringent, actually. We'll talk about that in a second. And natural laws, right? Natural laws exist that everyone must follow all the time, no matter what. Everyone is also perfectly equal, by which John means something like John Locke. I'm on first name basis with my boy over here, John. Something like equality of opportunity. Okay, equal right to make use of the nature to the best of your ability. And he's quite aware that some people are going to be more able than others. That actually turns out to be a little problem for him when we get to our second video. Okay. Though there is no politics, there is society, meaning that people live in families and villages and things like that. Okay, so it's not that we're not like randomly isolated Robinson Crusoes floating around on islands or something like that, right? There's society, families, but there's just no central government telling people what they're allowed and not allowed to do. So saying that there are laws of nature might sound a bit unproblematic. You're like, okay, like a lot of people you're probably like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, why make such a big deal out of this, Professor Selby? It's like, that's pretty obvious. Well, um, but the truth is, if these laws exist, how do we know they are there and where did they come from to begin with? Right? So, like, seriously, like, Locke, show me the laws of nature. Where are they written down? And Locke says, well, they're not written down. Anyone who you will but consult their reason will see them. Okay, my reason's telling me I want to punch you in the face because that's a really annoying argument. My boy John. And in John Locke's original formulation, uh, they come from God. The laws of nature come from God, and it's God's reason. So, really, in Locke's argument, in the way he constructs it in 1688, and in 1688, you can trot God out there no problem, right? He's a big guy up there with a beard and throwing lightning bolts. Okay, cool. No one really complains about that. But in 2020, I have a few questions about this God assumption, right? Although I will later try to defend it for you as well. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's not obviously right. So laws of nature are a product of God's reason. God gives them from up on high, and you use your reason and you look up into the sky, and there you will discover God's laws. Okay? But they're not the laws that are just written down in the Bible. That would be that's a move he doesn't want to do because the Bible is just a little too complicated and it doesn't exactly agree with itself all the time. So there starts to be some problems there. Okay. But we know God's natural laws from using our reason. So the reason part of us is like a little divinity within us, right? It's that part that kind of connects us to God in a way, according to Locke. I mean, this is all just so says Locke. Okay. And then again, remember, no natural sin, no original sin, tabula rasa. So, but reason, laws of nature, he's quite clear people are not just good. He's not some like cockeyed optimist or something. He completely understands conflict and, things like that. But when you read him that way, boy, he starts to look like people are kind of naturally good. Although, that's not, you got to kind of push them to get there a little bit. So I just want to be clear about that. But relatively speaking, he's a little bit more of an optimist than a pessimist as far as human nature. So what is reason? Let's take a step back here. What the heck is reason? Okay. Reason is the human faculty of critical thought that is problem solving, logical, good at thinking through all different kinds of possibilities and what ifs. Locke thinks that human reason is more or less a gift from God, and it allows us to follow his natural laws. That is to either be good, follow the laws, or bad, don't follow the laws. In this way, reason gives a kind of content to moral or ethical behavior. And in Locke's view, we would call reason substantive, meaning there's substance to it. You follow reason, and it's going to give you morality. So reason kind of equals morality, okay, in this view. Is this correct? So this is an empirical, there's some empirical stuff we can appeal to here, okay? The empirical research on reason, and you can go into like the field of cognitive science. You want to do some research, a little bit of evolutionary biology also brings out these questions like how did humans end up with reason? And some kind of evolutionary logic is much more scientific than Locke, God just gave it to you. But I'm also willing to entertain the possibility that, some jump in evolution could have been divinely ordained. And if you want to be Locke, you could maybe go down that path a little bit. I'm not crazy about that argument, but if you're really trying to maintain the religious elements here, I think that's the smartest way to do it. The empirical research on reason shows that reason may not work the way Locke wants it to. This is a really important piece of Locke. So much is hanging on reason, and the empirical research is not as good as we would like. Um, but this question is not 100% settled, and it may be the case, and I think this might actually be true, that sometimes if you use reason properly, you can get to where what Locke is doing, but it's not as obvious or easy as what Locke is saying. Okay, so instead of being moral, substantive, and wonderful, most scholars argue that reason is what we call instrumental, which is to say that reason is about helping us get stuff we want, not teaching us how to be good people. Okay? But if you want to be a good person, then reason most certainly is helpful. Okay? But if what you prefer is, what if you prefer to just cheat and fraud people? Well, then you can use reason to do that too. And we might say that's wrong, but reason itself doesn't really care. Reason is just helping you do whatever it is that you want to do. Okay? So in this case, it's like, think like a hammer. A hammer is not good or bad. A hammer has no moral content whatsoever. But if you use a hammer to build a house, there's like some positive value there. If you use a hammer to defend yourself against a home invasion, we might say that's morally good or positive. And if you use a hammer to attack somebody unjustly, well, that's bad. Okay, so that this reason is a hammer. When you use reason to be moral and good and to further morality in the world, well, then we like reason. But reason's not giving you the content of that morality. You need to find it somewhere else. It is possible that you can find it in reason, however. So I'm pushing back on Locke here, but I don't feel comfortable. My analysis of the empirical research, I'm not comfortable enough saying Locke is entirely wrong. It is certainly the case that reason does not always work the way he wants it to, but maybe it does in enough cases, and if you do it right, that we can still keep reason and morality all bundled together. So it's a little bit convoluted. Go back and rewatch that if you need to really keep a handle on this substantive instrumental distinction, which you should definitely have notes on in your notes. It's like critically important. Okay, so let's take a look at what a state of nature looks like. It's not art class, people, okay? Normally I would do this on the whiteboard, but state of nature, you have those laws of nature out there that govern the state of nature. There would be more people, but who cares? The three main criteria of state of nature: 1, no government; 2, free within the bounds of the laws of nature; 3, equal to use the goods of nature. So that's that equality of opportunity piece. And then the question here is, if you were in this state, like, what rights would you have, right? You gotta start listing out the rights. And I want you to think about that and list them out right now, right? Like, what rights would you have? And why do you think these rights are important? Hit pause. I'm gonna keep going. Okay. So let's ask this question. So we're in a state of nature. This over here is an apple tree that you see, and you've taken an apple off the tree. It's, no one owns the tree, so everyone has access to apples, but you took this one, and this one is now yours. I'll explain exactly how that works in my second video, but this is now your apple, okay? What if somebody wanted your stuff, your apple? Can I have your apple? They say. And how are things going to work in a state of nature? What's the legitimate way to do it? You make an agreement. That person can have it if I agree, i.e. we make a trade, or I'm feeling generous. So it's like, oh, you want my apple? Do you have any pears? I have apples but no pears, right? Make a trade. Or, yeah, I got lots of apples. I'm not hungry. Have an apple. Okay, that would be fine. We call that consent. Or maybe possession is 90% of the law. Take it and nobody can complain, right? Well, okay, it's pretty clear here that the answer is A. In a state of nature, right? If you want to get something from somebody, you have to ask nicely, get their consent, make a trade, buy it, whatever. Okay, you're not supposed to use violence on each other. What if they do try to take it from you by force? Give me that apple or else. See, that's a little gun that I drew there. Okay, and now you're sad because this is unhappy, right? People are supposed to be nice, but they're not being nice. Your answer here you have the right to defend yourself, A, or B, you do not have the right to defend yourself. You clearly have, right? Again, I mean, this might seem a little bit obvious, but you clearly have the right to defend yourself, right? I mean, no, you're not allowed to steal. And the thing is, so there you go. So let's specify a little bit more the main laws of nature. Okay, so first, the main law of nature is self-preservation. Okay, you not only have the right to preserve yourself, but in fact, the obligation. You're not even allowed to commit suicide. This right also allows you to use nature for your own convenience. Hunt, farm, fish, pull apples off trees, like that kind of stuff. Okay. So self-preservation is like the first key, biggest part of the law of nature. Second, you're obligated to, as long as it doesn't interfere with law number one, preserve mankind. Okay. As long as your own self-preservation is not at stake, you're pretty much obligated to help others. But then it's an interesting question, like how much? Like, do I need to be Mother Teresa? Well, no, you don't need to do that. Should I donate to charity? Probably, as long as it's not putting you in the poorhouse. Where exactly is this boundary? It's a little hard, like it's very hard to tell on this preserve mankind. But what he does say at one point is leave enough for others. Okay, so you can, for example, he's thinking about using resources in a state of nature. You can take as much as you want, but one of the limits is you have to leave enough for others. Although here's a second limit on how much you can take. It's wrong to waste. Thou shalt not waste. Okay? So if you take too many apples off the tree and they start rotting, that's a violation of the laws of nature and that's a no-no. Okay? If they rot on the tree, that's fine, but because that's just nature. But if you take them off the tree and they rot, that's bad. If you turn them into apple cider, applejack that never spoils, well, bully for you. You just figured out a way around it. Okay? And one of the most annoying things about John Locke is we get no complete list of what the laws of nature really are. Okay? And that's why I want to punch him in the face. Like, he puts so much pressure on this notion of laws of nature in a state of nature. You're going to use your reason to find them. And yet there's a few others out there. I'm not, but it's like, he's like, oh, and here's another law of nature. And, here's just like randomly, it's just like, that's a law of nature. I'm like, can I just get a complete list? I mean, at least the 10 commandments, they're all in one place. I can see them. I know what they are. Here you go. And at the very least, Locke, you could give me at least a semi-comprehensive list. You could even say, and there's more that I have not talked about. That would be fine. But really, it's, the first two he's pretty clear about. And then like the spoilage stuff just kind of like throws it out at some point. A few other ones, he's just like, oh, well then, there's this other one. I'm like, well, why? Why is that the case? I love you, buddy, Johnny boy. Okay. So the answers to those two things, which I already said, is look, they have to ask if you want somebody's stuff, you have to ask that's consent, and two, you're absolutely positively allowed to defend yourself. And what this diagram shows us is that consent is also a huge part of liberal political theory. Okay, so notice where we started. We started with reason, state of nature and laws of nature, and then highlighting out of that comes this important focus on consent, which consent itself is like almost a law of nature. It's really close. It might be. I think it depends on how you read Locke, but he never says consent is a law of nature. He just says you have to consent. So, really interesting. Like if he meant it to be a law of nature, I think he would have put it there. So there you go. Consent by both parties is the only way to legitimately do anything that involves more than one person. No slavery, right? Clear violation of people's individual rights, etc. If someone uses force, you have the right to use force back. So you're not allowed to go kill people willy-nilly, but if someone's coming after you, you absolutely have the right to defend yourself, and you're supposed to share if you have extra. But remember, no person or government is ever allowed to violate these rights. So we might also say no taxation without representation. The Lockean way of thinking it, should the state of nature helps come out of the Locke. That's a saying that the the American revolutionaries like to use, right? No taxation without representation. If we interpret that through a Lockean lens, this is what we're seeing: consent. No taking away voting rights, no taking away individual liberties. So, at least the Bill of Rights is relatively clear, right? You have freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. They're all kind of like, Second Amendment, right to bear arms. They're nice and articulated. Many of those, especially the freedom of speech, freedom of association, kind of go both ways between our two different theory schools, theory families that we're looking at. And but not so much the Second Amendment, actually. Like, I already showed you the liberal way of thinking about it, but when you read the Second Amendment, it doesn't read like the liberal way. It reads like a civic republican, right? And we'll look at that later. But as far as if you want to be a liberal and say right to bear arms, that's kind of how it looks like, okay? But Locke has a problem. There are inconveniences of the state of nature, of which there are three. So actually, your Lockean reading actually begins with this because it's such a wonderful summation of everything he's really trying to do, right? And so I put this chapter first because it really highlights, he's like, well, if the state of nature is so great as I've said it is, why would anyone ever want to leave? Well, it's, inconvenient. It's just inconvenient, I'm lazy. So the first inconvenience is, natural law is not written down, so people aren't really exactly sure what to do, which again reflects back to like, well, where does it come from? And, kind of puts us like re-raises that question. So people have to recognize the law of reason and act upon it. Secondly, there's no neutral judge of disputes. Our self-love interferes with our ability to be a judge in our own case. It interferes with our ability actually to use reason, right? When our stuff is at stake, we're not impartial, and we have a hard time following the laws of reason, the law of nature. So just a goofy example, but one day it's raining, or it's not raining, you go to school, you're in class, it starts to rain, and what do you say? Why is this happening to me? Right? It's not, oh, it's annoying that it's raining because I forgot my thing. It's really my fault. I should have checked the thing. Why is this happening to me? Like, you're so special and important, but it's raining on everybody. Probably, nobody. It's California. Who's bringing an umbrella? You know what I mean? So we're all in the same boat together. Or just, and then think about disputes on the playground and stuff like that. Like when you're a kid, right? Like our own desires really interfere with our ability to be neutral judges. And then lastly, when it is time to enforce the laws of nature, problem is it's always the big guy who's the one who's pushing people around the most. And so there lacks a power to make the enforcement, okay? And we do, in some cases at least, end up with the right of the strongest, which is, I'm bigger than you, I will take your stuff. I know it's wrong, but there's no real recompense because if you try to fight me, I'm going to win because I'm bigger than you, right? So that's a problem. And so Locke has a solution, a convenient solution to these inconveniences. Let's form a government that solves these problems. But you never, ever, ever lose the rights from the state of nature. When you agree to join or form a government, so you can either start one new or join one that's already in existence, you delegate these rights to the government, okay? You delegate them. You don't give them away forever. You delegate them. This is super important. Delegate means to give to somebody else to do for you or in your name, i.e., like a lawyer. He represents you. His actions are for you. When the government enforces rights, they're doing it for you. It's your authority that the government is acting on, okay? If he doesn't do it or doesn't do it right, you go do it yourself. And then that's also true with the government. So you delegate the rights to the government. It's all nice. But if something goes wrong and the government's not there to do what it's supposed to do, you still get to do it yourself, okay? So let's look at this one. So state of nature 4, what if people want to establish a government? Hey guys, maybe we should all agree to some rules, right? okay, okay. And everyone says, okay. And then that one little guy over there says, no, thanks. Question. Does that last person who said no have to abide by the rules? I didn't finish writing it down, but we're here now, right? The answer is no, he doesn't. He stays in a state of nature. The other 7 people all go form a government, and they're going to write down their laws, and he is still in a state of nature. And it kind of looks like this, okay? So from the state of nature, no government, self-enforcement, no third-party enforcement. Self-enforcement is the same way of saying similar things. These 3 people say, let's make government, okay? So now they're moving across the chart to what I call, this is my term, state of government. Locke calls it political society. And you delegate the inconveniences to government, right? And there's that little guy there, still all alone, no thanks. He's still in a state of nature. He doesn't move across the chart. But then look what's happening on this other side of the chart. Everyone's happy. You have a policeman there. See, it's a little P. And he's got a gun in a holster. Police equals government, right? You have a problem, he solves it. Okay. If he can't solve it, like if the guy's not there, you still have the right to defend yourself. Okay. So let's look at the conclusion here. Okay. What have we seen here with John Locke? Okay. The next video we'll talk about how to apply Locke to actually, that's the third video. We'll talk about how to apply Locke to contemporary ethical issues. My second video is going to extend some of this state of nature analysis for you. I just want to get a first sort of basic one going. But for now, let's just be clear about a few of the consequences of Locke's idea. This is an individual rights approach, and you have rights because you have reason. That's what we could call the primary assumption. This is also a limited government approach, okay? Government is limited in what it can do. It can't interfere with your natural rights. And any government that does that is illegitimate. And you then, if you so choose, have the right to revolution. Okay? Remember what Kant said. Respect due. Government is limited by respect due to a being endowed with reason. Generally speaking, you know what's best for you. So a lot of things, there's going to be this wide latitude for individual choice, right? On a lot of things. And that's from that guy Kant. Make sure you have loop back to that in your notes because it's such a key idea for how Locke and liberalism is working. Religious toleration is a key component of this system as well. Reason cannot tell us which religion is right. So as long as your religion is not like openly advocating overthrow of the government or openly advocating murder or right, so not all religions are equal. Some are going to be bad religions that we're going to say like, look, you're just not allowed to do that. But basically no. I mean, how many religions say like it's good to just randomly murder people, right? Like no one says that. All the religions are saying basically, look, be good to one another, be excellent to each other, right? Bill and Ted, the third one's coming out this summer. And then you get all these civil liberties, freedom of speech, religious toleration, freedom of association, all of these kinds of things, okay? So stay tuned for the second video that's going to expand upon this a little bit as well.